You're listening to the Leadership Enigma, powered by Transform Performance International, a podcast for the insatiably curious to explore the power of human-centered leadership to create real momentum for positive and sustainable change. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors as we discover that success leaves clues. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
Hi and welcome to the Leadership Enigma. Well, would you believe it? This is episode 99. And so for 99, we need another wonderful guest. And with me is Simon Leslie, who is the founder and CEO of Inc. Global, the world's largest publisher of in-flight magazines. Now, that is relevant because then a pesky pandemic came along. And Simon is also the author of 3 books. One of them certainly we're going to be focusing on because that is about the diary of a CEO in crisis. And we'll dig into that and about what it meant. Well, welcome again to the Leadership Enigma. And Simon, huge welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me in this beautiful studio.
This is pretty good, isn't it? Look at this, with the screens around us as well.
I don't like the good thing on the screen. It's a bit spooky.
There you go. There's a bit of feedback for us. Listen, thanks so much for coming to see us. I really appreciate it. And you and I have known each other now for a number of years. And everyone has got a story. So before we get into the meat of that story, just tell us a little bit about the early years and about how you were insatiably that entrepreneur, which led to you founding what is Inc. Global. And I know it's been running now for well over 20 years. So tell us a little bit about the background story.
26 years, coming up for 27.
There you go.
I realise I've been doing this longer now than I've been doing anything else in my life. It's been an interesting journey, and certainly the last 25 months has been ones I don't want to say I want to forget, because actually they've taught me a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the early days. I tried and failed 3 or 4 times to start businesses. I just didn't want to work for anybody else. Everybody I'd worked for were, you got to remember, in the late 80s, early 90s, it was a very different culture than it is today. And I remember my very first job and there being a team meeting and the guy pointing to 2 people at the back and saying, "Fuck off, you're sacked." And I'm like,
That was the old command and control function.
that was your what do you call it? Probation. It didn't bother with that. You think about just removing someone from a business today is such a process, whereas in those days it was
See you later.
see you later. And I'd seen bosses removed. Here's your box, out you go. And I thought, I don't really like this. And I went and I worked for Citibank, and that was even more uncomfortable. The guy that hired me got fired on the day that I arrived, and I was left there going, well, who do I work for now? And the person I worked for didn't like me, so I was out again. So I thought, I want to start my own business. I want to work for me, and I want to create a culture that I'd be comfortable coming to work in. And that's what I've been attempting to build for the last 27 years. It's had its high moments and has had some huge successes and some accolades, which I guess means that we did something right. And we've had plenty of critics, which means we've done something wrong.
Well, let me ask you a few questions in a minute about Inc. Global when you started that. But I want to understand, what do you think was the biggest push for you away from being employed? Was it the volatility? Was it the culture? What was it that just didn't feel right to you in those early years?
I guess I wanted to be an entrepreneur, whatever that meant. And it's taken me 20 odd years to figure that out and work out what it does mean and what I do want. But in the early days, that meant success, or that meant, I could, I suppose, create freedom for myself. That's what I understand it now. But at that time, it was maybe I wanted to be different, or maybe I wanted to create my own path or make my own story.
Well, this is a classic be careful what you wish for as well, because as I'm shuttling forward to shuttle backwards, obviously Inc. Global became the world's largest publisher of in-flight magazines.
Yeah.
But why in global? What prompted you to start that kind of business? And I'm sure it's iterated over 26 years, but what prompted that as the, right, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start this business. Where did that come from?
And we weren't an in-flight magazine publisher, as it were. That's become my accolade now, and and I wear it well. But and it served me nicely over the years. But actually, as we started out, we were a generalist publisher. We had accountancy magazine, lawyers magazines, lots of travel magazines, and I think it was the EasyJet magazine, which we won in 2001, just after 9/11,
right,
that propelled us, because that sort of put us on the map. We were this sort of cheeky little upstart who was doing it completely different to everybody else. We reinvented the sector, because previously airlines paid their publisher a lot of money.
Yep.
The publishers, if they bothered to sell ads, paid the airline back. Otherwise, it was all on the airline's risk. And we came along and said, by the way, your magazines aren't very good. They're costing you lots of money. What we're going to do is we're going to write you a check and we're going to take all the risk. And they went, okay, yes, please.
That sounds like a pretty good deal.
Yeah. And, I think at its peak, we launched something like 52 magazines.
Okay.
Because there was so many airlines started arriving and disappearing quite quickly in the early 2000s, and we were the de facto place where people would turn up and go, yeah, I've just started an airline, we need a magazine, would you help us please? And we'd say, okay, here we go.
Well, the reality is, I think most of us have probably had one of your magazines in our hands at some point when flying. So were you a disruptor, do you think, at that point?
100%.
Well, tell me a little bit about that, because I think is that part and parcel of who you are in relation to seeing something that doesn't work and knowing you can do better?
I've always been disruptive. I was thrown out of school for being disruptive.
I always say that's another episode.
Oh, that's a much longer story. But I don't think we set out to be a disruptor.
Right.
We set out, we just wanted to stay in business. I mean, we nearly failed so many times, and I captured much of this in the first book. We only survived because a German bank sent us money by accident.
Okay.
And that kept us going until things turned around. And on the day that we sold the business for the first time, which was about 3 years later, and as you know, German banks don't tend to make mistakes and don't seem to miss things in year ends. They wrote back and said, "Oh, can we have our money back?" And I always thought that was a miracle.
Yeah.
And people have said to me, "Do you believe in all these things?" And I do, because there's no reason why that should have happened. And we carried on down our path of just doing things to the best of our ability. And as we got better at doing what we did, we looked for ways to keep improving, and that's what I think made the difference. And that's why we disrupted it, because we were never satisfied with, okay, that's a good issue.
Okay.
How can we make it better? Well, and we'd go to the airlines, we'd say, look, are you happy with what we're doing? And they go, yeah, we're very happy. How can we make it better? What can we do differently? What would you like to see? And we challenge them to even look at their own product and say, what can we do to improve this?
Well, I think if anyone's probably read Richard Branson's book, I'm comparing and contrasting now, he always saw where there was a problem, where he could do better, which is why he started his trains, planes, and whatever else he's actually done. So there's a problem-solving aspect to that. There's a desire almost to make things better. I want to ask you a question about, help everyone understand Ink Global at its height, at its most powerful pre-pandemic, because I want to talk to you about, it's a very personal story, and you wrote the book about the diary of a CEO in crisis. And I think one thing I've enjoyed more so out of everything on this podcast is talking to people about the human element, as opposed just to the accolade. So help us understand, Ink Global at its mightiest was doing what?
In terms of revenue, or in terms
it was. How many magazines did you have at that time? Because you were the biggest publisher. So tell us a little bit about
36 magazines. We had a fledgling TV network which we just acquired.
Yeah.
We were making TV shows for United, American, Singapore, Virgin, EasyJet. So we were making an amazing amount of content every single day, and we were selling advertising against the content or against the products we're making.
Yeah. And I had the opportunity, I came into the office a couple of times and the place was buzzing. So there was a real
You
engine
saw
to
it
it.
as high, probably.
So, without a doubt, probably saw it as high, and there was a huge energy to it. Tell me a little bit about, before we move on to the pesky pandemic,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about the culture, because you are very responsible for that. And when I spoke to people, they said actually the culture was driven heavily by you.
Yeah.
Tell me what that culture was and why that was important to you.
It was a real reward culture.
Okay.
I rewarded behaviour, not always results. And it was really important to me to recognise that behaviour led to results, but not always. So sometimes people would work incredibly hard, put lots of effort in and not get the results and therefore be ignored. And I didn't want that. I wanted everyone to be recognised for what they did, even if it didn't lead to a result. And I think that's what sort of differentiated us from everybody else. I changed the commission scheme at one point, and I paid people based on the effort they put in, not just on the orders that they got.
Yeah.
And that was groundbreaking. And I lost probably 20% of my top people because they said, no, it's not fair. You're rewarding the underperformers, not the performers. And I went, this is the way I want to reward you. And, I don't believe you're working to your full potential. The culture was about seeing the world and travelling, because I think travel brings out the best in all of us.
Well, I know you love your travel.
I do love my travel, but I want everybody to experience this. So if I'd go somewhere and say, oh, that was nice, I'd then set up an incentive and say, you can come here too, or you can go to this resort. I remember there was one girl, she started, I think it was about October time, and she'd been with us 2 weeks, and she won a trip to Hong Kong. And about 2 weeks later, she left.
Right.
And everyone said, well, that was a waste. I said, she saw a part of the world that she would never have seen in her wildest dreams. And she experienced something that she wouldn't have experienced if it hadn't been for us.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in 20 years' time, she'll be still talking about that. So I never judge anything on the moment, because I think you have to look back at things to really understand if they were good or bad or not.
Now, I'll share something with you. And I'm not breaking any confidences here, because obviously I had the opportunity to talk to a number of people at Inc. And you say when it was really flying, no pun intended. And a lot of people actually pointed to you and credited you as having had a personal impact on them. So obviously you had spent time with people and you had been curious and you'd been interested in people. What was driving that?
I hired a lot of people who were, they weren't your classic hires.
Yeah.
They didn't come from sometimes not very good families, or had a very good education, or had been down on their luck.
Yeah.
I always looked for something else. Did they have hunger? Did they have drive? Did they have a point to prove? And I worked really closely with people to make sure that I could bring out something that was missing, and that's what we were successful at. We had so many people who came through our sort of grow our own community of employees, and a lot of them have gone on to do big things in other companies. And I think that people would hire them if someone had survived a year at Inc. That was like going to Oxford or something. It really was. You must be bloody good if you can survive a year there. So there was a real. There was a real, I don't know what the right word is. There was a sense of pushing and pulling at the same time with everybody, and we'd push them because it wasn't how good they were; it was how good we felt they could be.
Right.
And I think the problem with most people is that they don't know how good they can be, and as you get older and wiser, you start seeing potential in people that they don't see in themselves. And that's what I would like to try and bring out in as many of people as I could. And I wasn't sitting in this glass room ignoring everybody. I was on the floor, be it in Singapore, be it in London, or be it in Miami, with the teams, really spending time with them and talking to them and understanding them, knowing more about them than sometimes they knew about themselves, or finding out things about them that they hadn't shared with anybody in their life. And I think that's what made them feel part of our culture. And they felt listened to, they felt invested in, and they felt, I won't say loved, but, appreciated by somebody.
There was a work hard, play hard culture in there. Was that really being driven by you, that Inc. was not just about generating revenue for people? Actually, in some ways, there was a real family bond in there. I could sense that. People were saying that out loud. But a lot of people actually, in some ways, described Inc. as a safe harbour, that you had seen something in them that others hadn't, and that they felt this was an opportunity for them to thrive. That was coming from you. So was that by design, or do you think it just took on that shape and guise because of some of the experiences that you have had at school? And you said, you'd not done things perhaps in the way that others might have thought you had done it, so you carved your own path. And had Inc. in some ways taken on the shadow of its founder?
I think so. No, I know so. Somebody joining today, I can't actually wait to get to the office to meet him. He wrote to me and said, I've been watching and reading you for the last couple of years, and I'd like to come work for you. I love what you've done. I love what your message is, and I want to work at Inc. because of you.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying, okay, all these things that I'm doing are creating that interest in the business again. Because probably for 2 years I didn't. I put in the book that I wasn't the leader to trust. I didn't have enough belief in myself at times during this event. And, I was clearly not giving off the same aura. And I couldn't give people the opportunities that I'd given them in the previous decade before.
There's no CEO in the land that had the answers or has the answers to the pandemic, regardless of organisation. I think that's one thing that I've discovered during the 100 episodes now of the podcast, is that there was no playbook for it. And so people were trying to find their own way. So the pandemic hit and we were all grounded. We really were. But that meant there was a complete cessation to your work, to your revenue. So just help people understand how fast and how dire that shift was for you as a business.
We were probably on track for 150 million in revenue in 2020. January was an unbelievable month. February wasn't bad.
Yep.
And they're normally not great months.
Right.
So it's like...
It was looking good.
It really is looking good. This is an election year. We're going to have a good year. And March the 9th, which was my wedding anniversary, I got the phone call and it was, we're going to take this magazine off the plane. And that was the first one. Then it was another one. And we're like, that means it's only been on for 9 days. That means we ain't going to get paid. We've paid everybody. Everybody's been paid.
Yep.
We paid for the print. We paid for the journalism. Paid all the salaries. Oh, this is going to hurt a bit. I hope not everybody follows through, and then one by one,
right,
they started taking off. The only airline that kept it all the way through was American.
Okay. That's interesting.
And then they did something silly at the end of it when everybody else was sort of thinking about pulling it back. They pulled it off. So it's like...
Yeah, there's no sense to the universe.
I always say leadership is all nonsense. It doesn't have to make any sense. People do what they do when they do it, and you just got to ride that wave. It's like every time something good happens, something bad happened, 2 or 3 exit.
It's the yin and the yang, isn't it, with that? So help us understand. So, this was, you were absolutely rocking and rolling in January, February 2020. And then as a result, just again, try and help us understand, because you had an amazing crew, staff. You'd spent a long time building up 300 people. What started to happen?
I didn't know what to do. And no one really knew it in March because everyone didn't know how long it had been. And we probably did know because we had an office in Singapore and they'd been talking about this for a while. But, you'd had bird flu and you had SARS, and that never...
So those are the weak signals, or not so weak signals, but...
Yeah, I mean, there were red flags and we ignored them.
Right.
And then you start thinking, oh, gosh, how long is this going to go on for? And you speak to who you think are clever people and they say, it's fine, world can withstand this. 12 weeks will be fine.
Yeah.
Then one of my friends who's very sort of experienced within the travel industry, and he said to me, this is January next. He said September, but probably January next year.
Right. And
I said, oh, shut up, because no, this is worse than you realise. Then we had these investors, experts, and they said, no, 6 months max, you'll be fine.
Wishful thinking at that point, right?
And I thought, we had plenty of money. We can survive 6 months.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do to keep the team whole at this point? And then I think back to 2008, and I thought, well,
from the credit crash.
the credit crunch. You just got to just keep everyone sane. And I went on this personal journey of saying, okay, I'm going to get some people in to talk to you to motivate you, because you got 8 hours a day you're supposed to be working, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to do. So I'll bring some speakers in, we'll do some work, we'll do some workshop, we'll do training.
Yeah.
It'll give us an opportunity to look at everything, look at the business and see what we can do.
Now, I'm just going to pause you there, because you started to reach out to some pretty renowned speakers.
Yeah.
Some of which, thankfully, have been on the podcast. So welcome. But what was behind that? What was driving you to go and find other people to talk to you and the team? Try and help me understand that.
I think it was more to say, okay, if I had, in a perfect world, if I could get someone to talk about health and well-being, this is really important right now. Then I want to talk about business. Then I want to talk about kindness and gratitude. All the pillars of what we were really interested in as a business. And I'm gonna use this, and I'm actually going to collate all these talks, and it's going to give me a library of information. So when we get back to business, we've got this
Massive learning.
And this is a learning moment, as Gary Ridge called it. This is...
Who's coming on the show.
Oh, good. He's a very nice man. This library that we're creating is going to be really useful. I didn't realise that, one, it would be so many people. I thought we'd have half a dozen. It would, things would start moving, but it went the other way. We went into lockdown. We went into Pajama Land. We went into Netflix and Tiger King. So I was interrupting their day.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to. It was a way for me to see 150 people on a screen. I could see all the people. They could see me. We could talk to each other. We could have
connecting.
We just kept that unity.
Okay.
We meet on a Friday and have a sing-song, between all the offices. And
we've all got memories of this kind of crazy Zoom culture, haven't we?
Camaraderie, but you go from 3 offices to 250, and you think, oh God, what am I going to do now? Because as each week goes on, you think, I don't know what to say anymore. It's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It's
here
now.
It's
okay. I think it's going to be okay. It might be okay. I'm all right, I think. And I felt myself, like popcorn. You start off all nice and poppy, and then
Well, you are such a figurehead within Inc. Global, and you're full of energy. How did you deal with that sense of worry, concern, lack of energy, that repetitiveness that we all felt during the pandemic, maybe even a sense of hopelessness or helplessness? How do you deal with that when actually you've got over 300 people looking to you saying, all right, Governor, how are we getting out of this? What's the answer? Let's be honest, no one had the answer. No politician had the answer, so certainly no CEO had the answer as well. So how do you deal with that, though?
I'll tell you what was interesting is that I kept feeding my positive dog. If you imagine you have 2 dogs, right?
Yeah.
So I'm feeding my positive dog. And I had to stay positive because I wanted to be that beacon. I wanted to be that, when they came and talked to me, how are you? I'm fine. I'm great. This is fine. We're dealing with this. And I kept myself in good state until we sort of came out of it. And then I was like, oh, no, I did get COVID in the middle, and I did get...
Yeah, I saw that from the book. And the whole family got COVID.
The whole family got COVID. And then there were bits in the middle of 2021 where I was like broken. I was a broken human. But we were sort of not rescued, but we were starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel by then. But through probably May or June of 2021, I remained incredibly positive and encouraging and supportive. Even as people started to leave, I think it was 18 middle managers, and these aren't just, these are people who ran the business, people who started with me as salespeople, who I turned into leaders, who I gave them, their started life.
Yeah.
And they all left. They left not because they didn't want to be here. They just couldn't make the money. My structure was very much driven by commission, and they had no products to sell.
Yeah, there was no business.
One by one, they started to leave, and it was like, it's not you, it's me. It was breakup, and
Sounds like a relationship, doesn't it?
It was, but someone had been with me 2 decades, and you think, they're coming in crying, and I'm like, I understand. It's nothing I can do. You've got to go off. They've also created a lifestyle for themselves, and they couldn't afford to live in their lifestyles, and I didn't want that to change because they've worked so hard to get to where they were.
Every person was going through a personal experience.
Yeah,
really.
But you had lots of tech companies reaching out, offering stupid salaries, work from home.
They're winners and losers.
And so that was probably the hardest thing to deal with. After enough breakups, you start to be able to deal with that.
Yeah. So could you could understand the reason for people
100%.
leaving? But how did it leave you feeling though? Because at the end of the day, that's not an option for you. You're the captain of the ship. You're the founder of the business, and lots of people are looking to you to steer them through this storm. So how do you hang on to this when that failure is not an option for you? Leaving is not an option for you. How are you getting through that? Because we all go through mornings where you think, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And at one point, let's be honest, the news was just getting worse and worse and worse, and none of us could see an end to it.
Yeah.
That really is, and we'll come back to you wrote Equanimity, the diary of a CEO in crisis. How do you get out of that crisis when you feel that you're personally in a crisis? Not just the business, but you, the person who's seen as the captain who will navigate through the storm.
I don't think there were too many days. There were obviously the odd day, but most of the days I was looking for
Something.
safe harbour. I was looking for something. And I read a lot. I listened to a lot of positive stories. I went back. I read Man's Search for Meaning again. I really looked for real situations of how am I going to get out of this. Tim Grove's book Winning came out at the right time for me.
Right.
A Road Less Stupid. I don't know if you've read that. There was lots of things that I thought, I can use some of the stories and lessons from this to make my journey a little bit smoother. And then it was just about, okay, what do I want the business to look like when we come out of this?
Yeah.
How do I want to be? Because I was the guy that was first in the office, last out, working stupid hours, never being present. And all of a sudden I had time. Lots of time, something that I'd always craved. And I think I'm watching people wasting it. And I'm thinking, no, this is, I wanted this. This is a sign, this is something that you've got to take advantage of. And I really slowed myself down. And I think that's probably helped me thinking about it now is using that time effectively. Sometimes sitting by the seaside and just looking out to sea and just thinking and being present and just saying, I can't change this. I can't control it. Some days I'd get frustrated with Boris, and some days I'd just say, he's doing the best he can.
You can't control it either.
No, he doesn't know what to do because no one knows what to do.
So it's interesting because I'm listening carefully to the language that you're using, and you were explaining what do you want the business to look like when it gets through, not if, but when it gets through.
Yeah.
So there was always that positivity. And also, I'm summarising it, and Simon, you know me well enough to say if I've got it wrong, you'll tell me. But also, I'm hearing that you are captaining the ship, not from a know-it-all perspective, but no one knows what's going on now, so we need to somehow learn it all.
Yeah.
And we need to look for opportunities or learning or wisdom or just reflection from many, many sources. So you reached out to, I don't know how many speakers you actually, it was probably in the 30s, I think, wasn't it?
50.
In the 50, there you go, 50 for that. And you featured in the book with Equanimity. Taking that as a collective, because as you say, you thought you'd have half a dozen and you had over 50. What did you get out of that kind of insatiable, thirst-quenching wisdom that you were getting from lots of people with lots of great advice? What were you getting?
More than I realised. And I didn't, at the time I thought I was doing it to help them. And then I started thinking, actually, and this is what I sort of diary in the book is like, hang on, I've really learned something this month. Actually, what he said, I'm not doing, or I'm not doing that, or I'm not doing that. I can improve a lot of things. I certainly, when I got COVID, I certainly knew how to deal with it because I'd had so many conversations with people about.
So you were able to use that, almost action it.
The knowledge was really helpful, and I think it was just reaffirming to me stuff that I knew. It was a real good
From the subconscious
refresher.
to the conscious.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
a real refresher of, there's some simple things that you can do that can get you back on track. You don't need to slip into despair here, because it's not going to help. It's not going to help anybody.
I always say to people, especially who have been around for a while, we've been around for a while, that sometimes it's not about reinventing the wheel or, it's the golden goose, but sometimes just kind of revisiting an old friend is enough.
Yeah.
Where someone says something or sparks and you think, hang on, I do know that, but I've forgotten it in the frenetic world that we live in. And then you also talked about taking time, and so many leaders talk about just how does one strategically think, and what you need to is just stop.
Yep.
And in some ways, the pandemic gave us an opportunity to stop because we had to.
Yeah.
And it also sounds like you deeply reflected, and in some ways everything went up in the air and you thought, well, hang on, what matters and what doesn't now?
Exactly. I got rid of everything that I didn't need. My thinking went from probably, I'm an energy junkie, so anything to do with energy is my bag. It's my thing. And I was, at times my energy was waning, and I'm thinking, right, what can I do to improve my energy? How can I think better? How can I think clearer? Where am I thinking clearer? Because it's not just, when you're trying to use the same brain to fix the problem, it's not going to work. So you've got to get out of the problem. And I had this instance last week where one of my leaders in the office in Miami was sitting there pulling his hair out of his desk. And I said, do me a favor, go for a walk around the block and come back and tell me you fixed the problem. And I was doing another podcast, and he walked in and he went like that. And it's just something as simple as that, which is like, you're sitting there stressing out. Just think about it from a different point of view, from a different look point. You get the answers.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught in the moment, isn't it? This might be an unfair question. What do you think is the biggest takeaway or learning for you out of the last couple of years? As you said, you said that there's part of you that says, I wish it hadn't happened, and then part of you that says, well, actually, no, because a lot of learning took place. And in some ways, and you say in the book, you found out a little bit about you, because in some ways you got stripped bare. And it was kind of like, this is all I've got. And I know you're a fighter, and you came out fighting, and we'll come back to the success you now find yourself in. But is there a real takeaway that the last 2 years, is it a real gift the last 2 years has given you? What would that be?
It's been a complete gift. I think it's probably been the greatest 2 years of learning that I could have ever wished for. I created a library full of content. I had conversations with some incredible people. Some people didn't turn up and talk, but even so, it gave me access and relationships. My relationship equity has changed.
Yep.
The relationships that I created with some of the speakers who introduced me to many other people. And
It's the network.
it was a network effect. And one of them said to me this, you know what you've got now, Simon? You've got experience that not many people have got. And that is
Still standing.
And that's more valuable than money and everything. It allows you to do deals. I've done more deals in the last 5 months than I've done in the previous 35 years. Right? That's how confident it has made me in the ability to go out and smell a deal, create a deal, work a deal that works for everybody. And that's something that I don't think I would have learned if I'd just been, growing gradually over the last 24 months.
I'm interested in something else as well, because I've got some of your books in front of me, and I know you was this the first one, There Is No F in Sales?
Yeah.
Because I know when you wrote that, and I know all the proceeds of that went to charity, which is amazing. There's white belt thinking here, which thankfully I'm going to pass that to my son as well. But also on my computer, I've got a copy of Equanimity, which is the diary of a CEO in crisis. So there's an author in you, 3 books. What made you start to put the proverbial pen to paper, though, during this crisis? Because you really started to document the learning. But also, and I've read this fully, you have wrapped and it's a very personal narrative around it too, where I think you've been vulnerable in here. You've been courageous in some ways, saying, this was really tough for me, and this was tough for the organisation. And so in some ways we talk about the power of journaling. What were you doing, or what were you getting when you started to put this all down on paper? Through all the speakers you had and the experience you were going through, and you pulled it together for this narrative, why?
I think it was quite cathartic.
I bet.
I just, it's been through a few iterations. I mean, the first was just like a brain dump of these are all the things. And then I thought, well, actually, I started to look through my notes because I was keeping notes. I didn't think I was going to write a book because I didn't think it was going to last so long, but I just kept writing things down. And I don't know if you've noticed, but on LinkedIn the last 3 or 4 months, I've been documenting everything I do each month because I think it's really important, one, for me to look back and say, am I really taking it? I said I want to come out of this and be different and live a different life and have a different way of seeing the world. And if I'm not, then I'm not following my mission or my purpose or whatever you want to call it. I'm not sticking to what I said I was going to do to myself. So I'm lying to myself, and I don't want to do that.
Okay.
I want to be sensible about the way I run the business, but fearless at the same time in terms of doing everything I possibly can in the 30, 28, 29, 31 days of each month, and have as much fun as I can with the business and the people who work for me, and show them that this is what's possible. If you put something down on paper, you commit to it, and you stick to your promises to yourself, you can really live a life you want to live.
So what's different about you comparing now to Jan-Feb 2020?
I'm much more fearless. I talk about
You weren't shy in 2020.
No, I
fair,
wasn't.
But
I've never been. I was actually. I am really a shy human being, believe it or not. It's like a game of poker. You can play the 1-3 table, you play the 10-25 table. The game is the same. The stakes are bigger.
Yeah.
The risks are bigger. The reward is bigger. And I just decided I'm going to play it bigger. I'm going to play a bigger boys club. I'm going to take more risks. I'm going to have more fun. I'm going to maybe the banter is a little bit louder here, and I'm going to play the game. And I think that's what's different. I'm not, there are times when I'd fold as opposed to saying, come on, let's see another couple of cards. Okay, it's going to cost me a few dollars, but it's worth it to see where we're going. Because how many times you're sitting there and going, oh, that was only a $5, and I just threw my cards away, and as it panned out, actually I would have won. And I think that's the story of life. Be a little braver, be a little bit more opportunistic, and see what life throws at you. And don't be scared to do things. Do things that you say you're going to do.
that's the congruence part, right? If you say it, then do it. And I think you mentioned the poker tables there. I read that in your book. When's that going to be available? Hopefully.
Any day now.
Any day now. You heard it here first. So tell me,
You're the first person that's actually read it. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate the feedback.
Well, there you go. It's a privilege to have a copy. Thank you. So I've got a question for you. What next? What next for Ink Global, and what next for Simon Leslie? Let's start with Ink Global, because as you said, deals are coming through now. You've done some amazing. Just tell the listeners as well, because you've had a great breakthrough, haven't you, with the TV studio, and certainly kind of in airport advertising on screens. But you explain it. You'll explain it better than me.
Our TV business, Reach TV, it's blowing up. No, that's right.
In a good way.
In a really positive
good way.
We became partners with the NFL last year, and we showed live sports. We just signed a deal with IMG, and we're now showing live sports in planes. We're in hotel rooms. We've just secured a load of Wi-Fi at the airport. We have data on passengers from 13 major airlines, so we can really target the customer from the minute they search for a trip right the way through to they arrive at the airport and open the Wi-Fi. Yeah. We send them messages. They watch the TV. We've got screens over 90 airports in the US. They get on the plane. They read one of our magazines. We've unfortunately only got 3 magazines left, but they're still there with United Airlines, Virgin Atlantic and Eurowings. So if you're on any of those 3, you'll read one of our magazines.
Okay.
And also now with Sport 24, which is on 13 major airlines, where if you're flying at the right time, you can watch a Premiership game, or you can watch the Olympics or the World Cup. So we're
Business is changing.
so we've gone from this sort of travel media business into being sort of the home of live sports in travel. We had the Super Bowl at the airports in February. I love sport. I love everything about sport. I'm the second best tennis player in this country of my age.
You're going to have to tell me a bit more about that one, right?
Well, I played 100 games of tennis last year, and I came second in every single one of them.
There we go. We love that. I was going to say, tennis is my passion as well. We're going to have that conversation over tennis net. What's next for Simon Leslie? What's next for you? Because you could have given up at any point, and maybe some people would have done. But what's next?
Maybe I should have done, because there were times when you say, "Well, it's easier to give up and start again. Get a new toy."
Yeah.
I met. Funny enough, I did the podcast with Jordan Belfort, and
for anyone who doesn't know, we're talking about the Wolf of Wall Street.
And as I'm leaving his house, he goes, "I put money down. You're going to do this." And I thought to myself, one, I don't want to let you down, but two, I don't want to let myself down. And that was in sort of November 2020.
Right.
So it was like, okay, that was at the back of my mind. I'm not going to let people down. I'm going to keep going. And I kept saying to myself, just save it, and then you can make your mind up. Just save it, and now I'm sort of flourishing again.
Yeah.
What's next for me? I've started working with a few individuals who are probably where I was, not in the pandemic, but pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Stressed out, overweight, overwhelmed, overworked, not knowing how to create a balance, not knowing how to grow a business, how to do acquisitions, how to sell, how to build, all those elements of the business which I found I'm quite good at. And I'm helping them rewrite their story, look at their story and say, okay, this is something I want to do better. So I haven't got the capacity to take on lots of people, but if I find the right people who I feel I can genuinely help, I will do that. I've got a few investments with some young entrepreneurs, and that's a real passion of mine. Is really helping the next generation of entrepreneurs come through. My own son is helping me live my life again through him and his business.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful seeing him follow my playbook in a completely different industry and have unbelievable success doing it. He took his whole team to the Maldives at Christmas.
Nice.
And then last week he flew them on a private jet to the south of France, and they worked in the south of France for a week by the swimming pool. And I went, go on.
I think we should all be working for him, Simon. I mean,
he's got the right idea.
Where do we sign up? This is going to be a really unfair question. Is there a piece of leadership advice that you carry with you always, that you've given or received, that is almost your go-to piece of advice? Is there something that you can share?
It's all nonsense. It really is. Listen, you don't become a leader because you get a title of the leader. It's like saying, if you stand in the middle of a car park and call yourself a car, you're not a car. Right? It's nonsense. And I don't mean nonsense. Nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? Because nothing makes any sense. Some of the greatest decisions I've made have been absolutely illogical, and they've had the greatest successful outcome. And some of what seem like the best decisions I've ever made just turn out to be a waste of time.
Yeah.
So you've just got to make as many moves as you can, and
keep moving.
And keep moving forward.
Okay.
KMF, keep moving forward, because if you keep moving forward, momentum will take you to the next place.
So final question, because you talked about that you're mentoring and you're paying it forward now. How can people get in touch if they want to carry on the conversation, learn more?
They can follow me on LinkedIn, where I document my months. They can follow the Motivational Poet. That's something we didn't talk about, but it's something I'm quite passionate about.
Funny you should mention that, actually, Simon, because the Motivational Poet, this again is you writing, you actually writing poems. How did this come about?
Well, that started in January 21, and I thought, I'm going to post a poem. I wrote this poem, and I thought, I'll post it, see what happens. I've posted 480 poems every single day since then.
Right.
I mean, and that's discipline, consistency, creativity, and it's been shared by some of the biggest names in social media. I published the book just as a memo. You can't actually buy it. I keep it with me. It's my
This
gift
is my
that I
copy
give
now,
away.
right?
It's your copy.
Thank you very much indeed. I've done very well for books, by the way.
And it's just been something where I've got it's interesting. If you go back and you look through the poems, you can see what was in my head at the time and what I'm getting out. And I'm going to keep doing it and see where it takes me. I mean, there's probably cards and posters and other stuff that's going to come out of that. But it really filled time and gave me something to help myself. And in the spirit of it, it's helped a lot of people. I get fantastic feedback from that.
This is great to see as well. As you say, it's cathartic, isn't it? The writing down. And listen, and now you've been a guest on the Leadership Enigma.
And hopefully between us, we're going to figure it out. Whatever this leadership thing is.
We're just going to keep asking really smart people and try and get it kind
Let's
of
hope the next guest.
some of the parts.
The next guest fills that role anyway.
Thank you so much for being a great guest. It's lovely to see you. Take care.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap, my friend James.
Join us again next week for more tips and strategies on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or visit the dedicated website, www.leadersenigma.com, powered by Transform Performance International, where you can access our exclusive learning, including books, videos, bonus content, assessments, and more. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.